Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this webinar about Energize Denver Ordinance. My name is Desmond Green, Managing Principal with WB Engineers+Consultants and the Director of the Energy and Sustainability Practice for the company. We are very happy to have with us on the webinar Sharon Jay, who is the Energize Denver Policy Manager with Denver's Office of Climate Action, Sustainability and Resiliency, otherwise known as CASR. Sharon will run through the Energize Denver Ordinance presentation, outlining the policy requirements, targets, and overall goals of the program. Directly following Sharon's presentation, we will go into some more details about the next steps after you benchmark your building and how you can strategize about reaching the 2030 goal. We will show you how to do this, or how this is accomplished, with two case studies of buildings from other regions that have similar policies. Just a housekeeping information, if you have any questions, please place them in the Q&A and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. And if we cannot answer them today for some reason, we will follow up with an email. So I'll now hand it over to Sharon for the CASR presentation.
Thank you. So like you said, I'm going to go over the ordinance and all of the sections and requirements that are in the ordinance. Let's go to the next slide. So it is split into three sections. The first section covers benchmarking, which we've done for a while now. The second is brand new, and it talks about performance targets. And I'm going to go into that in so much more detail, but this is just a summary slide. And then I'm going to go into very briefly the electrification requirements that are going to be built into the building code over the next 10 years. So just a little bit of background. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So we have climate goals in Denver, which is the impetus for this particular ordinance. We've committed to eliminating greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. And for our buildings and homes, that means that all new buildings and homes need to be net zero energy by 2030, and all existing buildings and homes need to be net zero energy by 2040 if we're going to reach our goals. What that means is that most of our greenhouse gas emissions are coming from our larger buildings that are over 25,000 square feet. It's actually 82% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from this particular group. And then we have a smaller group that has smaller buildings that is only 18% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So in order for us to meet our goals, most of our performance requirements focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the larger buildings. So there are benefits for building owners and occupants. If we look at the avoided social cost of carbon and you reduce utility costs and return on investments, that kind of thing, we will provide over $1 billion in benefits to the city as a whole. As buildings improve their energy use and lower the cost of operations, we'll become a more attractive city for businesses and residents. It also improves your return on investment, your property values, improves the building stock in the city of Denver, reduced energy bills and cost of operations, and improves indoor and outdoor air quality. Next slide. So we put together an Energize Denver task force last year, worked through most of 2021, and gave them a goal of how do we achieve that net zero energy by 2040. And the design of this ordinance is what came out of that task force. They focused on improving health and equity outcomes, creating jobs, and driving climate solutions. So they had many task force meetings, lots of working groups and side meetings, and we looked at best practices across the country to be able to design this ordinance. So I'm going to go into the first section, and it's the benchmarking section. So we have been benchmarking since 2016. It's all buildings over 25,000 square feet and larger. You report your energy use to Energy Star Portfolio Manager. Our benchmarking requirements have not changed. So if you've done it in the past, it's the exact same requirements, and it is due on June 1st, which is only 2 weeks from now. So if you haven't submitted it, please make sure you do. We've also updated our benchmarking map at energizedenver.org to focus on site EUI and some other metrics. So if you'd like to go take a look at the new map, it's really neat and it has a lot more information than the old map did. So a new thing for this year is that the state of Colorado is also doing benchmarking for the first time. So they decided it was going to be buildings 50,000 square feet and larger. It's done by the Colorado Energy Office For this first year, it is due on December 1st, but then every year after that, it'll have the exact same deadline as we do on June 1st. They do have an annual filing fee, which is a little bit separate, different from us. So if you're in the city of Denver or a city that already benchmarks like Boulder or Fort Collins, then we are actually going to submit your benchmarking report for you. So you send it in to us, we'll forward it to the state, but you then have to go to their website to pay the $100 fee to be considered in compliance. If you are not in one of those cities, you would just go directly to the Colorado website to submit your report. So now I'm going to dig into the performance requirements, and this is probably where we're going to spend most of our time. The overarching goal for the performance requirements is to reach a 30% improvement in energy performance across all of those buildings by 2030. So to achieve that goal, what we did was we designed energy performance targets for 2030. So this applies to all buildings over 25,000 square feet. It uses site energy use intensity, or your KBTU divided by square footage. We set these targets at the 85th percentile. So 85% of our buildings are going to have to make some type of reduction depending on where they are in reference to the 2030 target. The other 15% have already met that target and just have to maintain their performance. If you have a mixed use building, like you have several different property types in your building, then what we did was we designed a mixed use target based on the 3 largest property types. And the chart on the right-hand side is an example of the top property types in the city. So offices have a target EUI of 48.3, hotels is 61.1, and so forth. If you want the full list, you can go on to our website, and we have the full list of about 60 different property types and their site EUI values. So for our unique building types, these were ones that we did not have a robust enough local or national data set to be able to set an EUI target. These include aquariums, the convention centers, data centers, parking, utility, power stations, that kind of thing. And what we did was we just set a 30% reduction target instead of setting a site EUI target. And alternate compliance options are going to be important for this group because they may be in a situation where they can't just outright make a 30% goal. So if you are in one of these types of building types, then you're more likely going to talk to our office once we design our alternate compliance options. For manufacturing and agricultural, one of the interesting things about this group is that they have not been required to benchmark for the last 5 years, but we are going to be setting performance targets for this group. So what we are doing is setting up some focus groups to do some stakeholder engagement over the next year with this group on how do we get them to benchmark and then set performance goals that are equal to the 30% savings. So if you do have one of these types of buildings, then you will probably be hearing from us in the next couple of months to start that engagement process. So interim targets, what we did was we took that 2030 target and we set a couple of interim goals to kind of help all the building owners get to where they need to be in 2030. So we set them for 2024 and 2027 by drawing a straight line from your 2019 baseline to the 2030 target and set those goals, those site EUI targets for those years. After you meet those targets, you have to maintain them. So this is what is in the chart is what we are regulating. If a building wants to go faster, let's say get to your 2030 target earlier, you're certainly welcome to do this. This is just the minimum requirements of what you have to do is hitting those interim targets and then maintaining them indefinitely. So data correction, this is a really super important thing to be looking at for the next couple of months. Is were you benchmarking your building properly? If your square footage is possibly wrong, or your property types are possibly wrong, if you are not accounting for high intensity spaces. Let's say you have an office building that is 90% office and only 10% restaurant. A restaurant EUI is like in the 190s, so you could get a little bit of a break if you actually benchmarked that restaurant section. It's not required by portfolio manager if you have less than a 10% property space use in your building, but we're suggesting is that you do it anyways, because then your mixed use target will give you a break on that restaurant instead of having to hit the 48.3 that an office is. So we want to make sure that everybody is looking at their benchmarking data very carefully over the next couple of months, and then asking for a data correction for and getting the correct site EUI target assigned for your building based on what's actually in your building. So we also, as part of the program, have a solar credit that if you installed solar doesn't normally affect your site EUI. So if you're in Portfolio Manager, you put in your solar data, you will see that your site EUI doesn't actually change. It changes your source EUI. But what we want to do is give credit for local solar that's built and allow a credit off of the site EUI. We are still designing this credit. There's some differences between the state and what they're designing on their performance credit. So this is not finalized yet. We are going to have a solar credit of some kind, but we still have a few details to work out and should be working on that, finalizing it over the next couple of months. So our alternate compliance options, we are going to be allowing for inherent characteristics or specialized operations that might not be accounted for in your site EUI target. So we are going to be designing over the next month or so, we're going to finalize some of these details on what could possibly be allowed to adjust your target. We are also going to allow timeline adjustments. Let's say you have a major renovation planned for 2028, which means you won't hit your 2024-2027 target. We may, with some information and justification kind of sent into us, allow for those interim targets to be missed as long as you agree to complete what you said you were going to do in 2028. So we're working on the details around that. We are going to have a prescriptive option for buildings, smaller buildings, to be able to hit their interim targets, and we're still working out a few details on that. And then we may allow for some very slight adjustments based for under-resourced buildings. So what we're working on right now are some of the details. If you take a look at our rulemaking from January, it's very generic language, like it says you have to turn in a clear plan, but what exactly does a clear plan mean? And what are the minimum requirements of that clear plan? That's what we're working out over the next month. And we hope to do some stakeholder engagement and focus group feedback in June and finalize some things in July and August to update our rulemaking. So data correction versus target adjustment. Data correction is for correcting information in Portfolio Manager to make sure that you are representing your building correctly when we set the very first 2030 target for you. Target adjustments are things that are outside of that realm. So let's say these inherent operational or construction characteristics that are not accounted for in the site EUI. The data correction is very important for your square footage and your property type. And then all of these other things that aren't accounted for in Portfolio Manager, like you operate your building 24 hours because you have a call center, or you have an indoor swimming pool that's heated and it requires a high intensity. Those are things that are not accounted for very well in Portfolio Manager, and we would make a target adjustment after that. But what I will say is that we are expecting that you have already done your data correction if you need to before we start looking at target adjustments, which is a much more complicated process. So steam loop buildings, I've been getting a lot of questions about this particular group because we have about 120 buildings on this steam loop in downtown Denver. These buildings are going to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis under the alternate compliance options. More than likely, they will either get a target adjustment or a timeline adjustment based on what's going on. There are long-term plans in the works for the steam loop, but they are not going to happen by 2030 to meet our targets. So if you have if you're one of these buildings and you have a larger EUI reduction goal, it actually makes sense to look at electrification because you can get some huge reductions by electrifying your equipment in your building and getting off the steam loop. If you have a smaller reduction goal, like you're closer to your site EUI target, it makes more sense to not worry about the steam and look at some of the the other efficiency measures like lighting and controls and retro commissioning. So then we have a small building performance requirement. This is not performance-based, but it's prescriptive. So buildings that are between 5,000 and just under 25,000 square feet by the deadlines, according to their building size in the chart, are either going to have to do a lighting upgrade to LEDs or install solar that's worth 20% of the current energy usage. Now, if the buildings have already done that, all they have to do is turn in paperwork. It's pretty simple requirement for smaller buildings. So penalties, I get a lot of questions about penalties too. We are actually working out an implementation schedule. The way the ordinance language is written is that it's a certain dollar amount per KBTU of reduction not achieved. So what we would do is take the difference between your interim or your final target and see where you are for that year's performance, and then give it a KBTU dollar value of what you didn't get to the goal. So if you hit your goal, you're good, no penalties. If you didn't quite make it, then there would be a penalty on it. But we really want people to spend the money in their buildings and reach those reduction goals instead of gathering money. Because if we do penalties, what we're going to do is reinvest it in energy efficiency programs. So what happens is if you don't invest in your building, we're going to give you a penalty and then spend your money in somebody else's building. So we really want people to do the work in their buildings. And that's why we designed the flexibility into the target adjustments and the alternate compliance to make sure that you're actually reaching your goals instead of paying a penalty. And those are going to be finalized also in the next month or two. So the state is developing its own performance policy. They want to, by 2030, do a reduction in 20% greenhouse gas emission savings, which is about equivalent to our 30% energy reduction savings by 2030. And so this is still only going to apply to buildings 50,000 square feet and larger, which is what their rule covers. And the task force meetings are going on right now. Through October, they actually have to get the recommendations to the Air Quality Commission by October. And so if you're interested in seeing what's happening with the state task force, we have a representative from our office on that task force, and we're trying to create as much alignment with our existing performance policy as possible. But there have been some differences of opinion. So if you're interested, please go to their website. So we're going to talk about renewable heating and cooling, and this is essentially about electrification of our equipment. And this is going to be implemented by community planning and development because it's actually adjusting the building and fire code for the city. And they have lots of meetings going on right now to actually discuss how to implement this. So Xcel Energy is rapidly decarbonizing the grid. They have a goal of 80% renewable electrical grid by 2030, which is really crazy. And then hitting the other 20% by 2050. And you'll get a copy of these slides where you can actually click on all of these links. So if you want to see more about Xcel's plan, it's called the Xcel Energy Clean Energy Plan, where they've detailed exactly what they're going to do to hit that 80% renewable. So what we have to do is if the electrical grid is renewable, we need to electrify our equipment and get off fossil fuels so that we are decarbonizing our equipment at the same time they're decarbonizing the grid. So it's talking about heat pumps. It's heat pumps move heat instead of creating it. They're 200 to 300 times more efficient than natural gas equipment. And while natural gas is currently less expensive, because you have that 2 to 3 times efficiency, then you end up kind of hitting cost parity on the cost of your utilities after the return on investment on switching out your equipment. So what we're working on are some updating changes to the code. So what we're focusing on is that all commercial and multifamily buildings will eventually require partial electrification of space and water heat upon system replacement when cost effective. And those two concepts about upon system replacement and cost effectiveness are very important to the way we are implementing this. So we're not asking all existing buildings to tear out all of their natural gas equipment as of January 1st, 2023. We're saying when your system reaches the end of its life and you are going to replace it, then we have a schedule of when electrified equipment would be required. And I'll go over that in the next couple of slides. So starting on January 1st, 2023, we want folks to start thinking about what it would take to electrify their equipment. So they're going to be upgrading the efficiencies of the equipment in the building code starting in 2023. It's some of the things that they're talking about in committee right now. And then when you go to replace that natural gas equipment after 2023, you have to do 2 out of the 3 things on this list. You need to submit an electrification feasibility report, which is in development right now. You have to right size the equipment for your current space conditioning needs. In the past, everybody oversized their equipment to make sure that they were covered just in case. And we want everybody to right size instead of oversize. Or you need to pressure test your natural gas piping. We think most people are going to do the first 2 bullets because pressure testing is actually quite expensive. So this is the schedule of when the building code is going to be updated. So they're focusing on easy to electrify equipment for the 2025 update. So that would include furnaces, rooftop units, individual water heaters, and then there's this cost effectiveness test that we want to make sure that the market starts bringing, working with the market to start bringing the technology to a point where we have this cost parity between natural gas equipment and electrification equipment. We have a lot of work to do on that, but we're hoping things will move over the next couple of years to make this possible. And then by 2027 update, we would focus on the harder to electrify equipment like PTACs, boilers, central hot water heaters when cost effective. Now, this is all the outline we have at this moment, but if cost parity is not achieved based on market specifications or what's happening in the market, then we would adjust the schedule accordingly. We really hope we're going to be able to work with manufacturers in the market and that kind of thing to make this schedule possible. So this is the outline of what is happening on the development of the electrification program. We actually had an RFP just close about a week or 2 ago where we're going to have a contractor on board that is going to help us design this. They're going to help us design the feasibility reports. We're going to have materials made to educate everybody. How do we review the submissions? We are designing pilots right now. So if you are in a building that is at the end of your system life for natural gas and you want to look at electrification, you could possibly get some extra funding to be able to be one of our pilots as we design our incentives. And then based on what we've learned from the feasibility reports and the pilots, we're going to be designing incentives that are going to help people electrify their equipment and pay for the feasibility reports. So all of this is happening over the next 6 months and a lot more to roll out after that. So we are designing additional support and incentives to be able to help with all of this stuff that I just talked about. So we have our Energize Denver Hub as our website, has lots of really great information, some really great materials. We're actually going to be designing a whole lot more content for that over the next 3 to 4 months. So go ahead and bookmark the website and then keep coming back as we add things. And then we're designing additional assistance for under-resourced buildings. So these are buildings like that are human service providers, nonprofits, things where they may not have the funding or the staffing to be able to really take to heart and implement the site EUI targets. We're going to be providing them additional assistance so that they can actually reach their targets. So there are a lot of incentives and financing already out there, and we'll be adding to these, especially on the electrification side over time. Xcel Energy probably has 15 different programs that are prescriptive and custom. If you don't find something on the prescriptive rebate side, you can go through their custom program where they're looking at performance and all kinds of other things. So I encourage you to take a look at Xcel and see what are some of the things that they can help you with. They also have access to a National Energy Improvement Fund that you might be able to get some funding through if you can't find funding in other ways. We have a STEAM program that is some incentives to electrify and pay for upgrades in STEAM buildings. And then there is Colorado CPACE financing and Colorado's Clean Energy Fund, which is brand new. If you haven't heard about Colorado's Green Bank, I would definitely go to their website and look and see what they can help you with if you need financing. So we also have a smart leasing program, and this is going to basically help you work with your tenants to reach your EUI targets. 20% of our buildings that have to do this performance are all leased buildings. So you're going to have to work with your tenants at least somehow. And so what this does is helps you with the tools and training, some tentative language about how you can green your lease. And so if you're interested in more about this particular program, you can reach out to our program manager. Her name is Lucy, and she can get you connected and wrapped into the program. So next steps. So this is a wrap-up slide of basically all of the stuff that I talked about that's still in development. We have a basic framework for our alternate compliance options. We just have a few details to work out. We hope to have that done by next month. We have to finalize the solar credit and kind of decide how much we're going to align with the state building performance standard. And so we're working out some of those details now and then doing some engagement on that. Our under-resourced buildings, we have a draft of what we think the additional technical assistance is going to be for those buildings. And we're doing community meetings in those areas where the under-resourced buildings are to make sure that our support tiers are actually exactly what they need. Our penalties, we're still working on an implementation schedule, but we also think that that's going to be done by June. For manufacturing and agricultural, we'll be sending out notices this summer for some invites for the meetings. And we just launched last week an Energize Denver 101 training. So if you're familiar with benchmarking, we've offered a benchmarking training for energy service providers, benchmarking contractors, that kind of thing, for a few years now, where you take it, the training, you pass a quiz, and then you get listed on our website on somebody who knows exactly how to benchmark buildings for the city of Denver. We did the exact same one type of training for kind of Energize Denver 101, which is, you guys are getting a slightly shorter version of that today. So if you are a contractor or energy service provider, you can go take this program and then take a quiz and then get listed. We're going to do a 201 version probably in about 3 or 4 months once we finalize the updates to everything that's on this chart. So that will be available in a few months. So getting started, what we suggest is everybody start thinking about either an energy assessment, which Xcel Energy offers, or doing at least an ASHRAE level 2 at a minimum. If you only have a small site EUI reduction you have to do, you don't necessarily need a full-blown audit. But if you're looking at 20% or more of a reduction, that you really need to do an ASHRAE level 2 at a minimum. Look at electrification and see how much it could actually reduce your EUI. It's different for every building. Look at on-site and off-site solar as a way to get that solar credit to reduce your EUI. And then look into strategic energy management as an idea or a program to be able to organize what you're doing on your energy management, because this is definitely not a one-off thing, because you have to maintain your site EUI. It's something you need to think about strategically and long-term. So immediate next steps for your building. These are some of the things you need to be looking at now. Check out our website for more information. You can sign up for our existing Buildings and Homes newsletter so that when we do make updates, we're going to put them in our newsletter to let everybody know. Look at your benchmarking data to make sure you don't have to do a data correction and get your target adjusted. The compliance letters went out in the middle of March, and we sent a follow-up email at the end of March. If you do not know what your site UI targets are, you can call into our Energize Denver hub and they can tell you what they are. And then check out Xcel's energy programs. I think that's a really good way to start to see if you can get some funding and some rebates to be able to do your work. So I'm going to turn it over to Desmond and Marcus.
Thanks very much, Sharon. That's a nice segue into our part of the presentation. So you've benchmarked the buildings and you've established where you have to be in 2030 and what the interim targets are. Can you go to the next slide? So we're going to go. This is just a as a detailed graph that we borrowed from Sharon's presentation, which demonstrates it perfectly. What typically what you would have to do. So Marcus will walk through the details of an energy audit, what that entails, what the results would look like or should look like. We also have 2 case studies that we will review with you. So Marcus, you want to take it away?
Sure. So as Sharon mentioned, that energy assessment, just understanding the difference between those, and Sharon kind of touched on that. The energy assessment is more of a high level. If you have specific targets that you already understand, old equipment that can be replaced, looking at that at a high level. The next step beyond that is that energy audit. So we're actually walking through that building and actually kind of tuning up the building to in more detail, more level of detail, to where we're meeting with the facility managers that know the building the best, understanding how it functions and how it can be improved and in the way of developing ECM. So understanding the energy utility bills, how it's actually performing from a meter standpoint, from a schedule and operation standpoint with the staff. And then the next step is, from all that evaluation, is identifying the applicable energy conservation measures that could get that building to that performance target that they're looking for. And then in addition to that, there's also identifying retro commissioning measures, looking at, as I mentioned, tune-up, looking at measures that can actually be corrected or updated to, such as setbacks, temperature setbacks, to actually improve without doing major investments. So this is an example of a detailed energy audit that we did. To the level of detail that it gets into is, on the left, we have the number of ECMs that were looked at and evaluated in this particular building. There's retro commissioning there, what we estimated the savings could be, giving our walkthrough and understanding of the building. There's steam traps. We mentioned steam, buildings on steam. There's opportunity in reducing steam use, VFDs, outside air. So if you look at the column, the top area, we evaluated those energy savings associated with those ECMs, the cost savings per year for each individual measure, and the implementation costs, of course, for each one, the simple payback for each one, and the greenhouse gas emissions, and also the Energy Star score. So as you can see, as we identify these individual parts and pieces of the building that can be improved, we can then look at the overall target. So a part of this is also looking at a baseline model. If we have the energy utility bills, then we can look at that, those bills, build the building, kind of a virtual building, match those buildings, which is a calibration of that energy model to match how that building's performing as close as we can. We develop that energy model to match a baseline, such as the 2019 baseline, and then we assess the impacts of implementing those ECMs. So if we put those ECMs into that model, then we can estimate the CapEx and return on investments for each of those, so that we can identify a path forward to achieving these goals and targets. And then here's another overall analysis of how that could then be taken at a high level and looked at. Once this analysis is completed, we can see that 2019 baseline, the annual usage, and the projected energy use from this analysis, and then results could be 36% savings, which is beyond the 30%. So then we're looking at costs, what that impact is. This is adding value. So if we're looking at just simply cost, that operating cost is freeing up a lot of dollars for that building on an annual basis, and contributing to that initial capital investment. It's reducing the KBTU per square foot, and then looking at a better Energy Star score, and of course the annual emissions. So we'll look at all these and look at how it aligns with the energy ordinance. And then, so we mentioned a little bit about incentives. This is from Xcel's website, an example of if you have fluorescent or older lighting types that can be converted to LED. Of course, Xcel offers incentives. This is just a simple example of what they did for a project on their website to provide incentives in initial capital costs to help implement that project. And it had a 1-year payback. And there's another one, just VFDs, looking at those prescriptively and identifying what can be offered to help implement those projects and get them done faster. And then again, another, just evaluating prescriptive versus custom and understanding how that can apply and help the building and help your building achieve some of these capital or implement some of these capital improvements to your building.
As Marcus showed you, you should have a list after the energy audit, a list of ECMs and RCMs with estimated construction costs, return on investments, and associated reduction in EUIs. The next step is to develop a strategic plan to get you to your goal by 2030. So hopefully by implementing some or all of the ECMs and RCMs, those goals will be met or exceeded. And we always suggest identifying the low cost, high impact projects from the list of ECMs and RCMs to work on first. For example, some of the RCMs that Marcus mentioned as well could include simple measures as replacing broken sensors, adjusting set points, temperature set points, night setbacks, operating hours for fans and pumps, and other pretty straightforward kind of reprogramming and software control type scope items that can result in substantial savings. So there are substantial savings even by retro commissioning your building on a yearly or a twice yearly basis. So by selecting these types of projects, you can build momentum before tackling some of the more challenging and expensive high capex projects such as equipment replacement like chillers, air handling units. And if you are assessing a portfolio of buildings or one or more buildings, we recommend identifying the worst performing buildings and working on those first, which will help you get out of the gate faster. So Marcus will now bring you through a couple of case studies that we performed in the last 18 months, which are a good example of the results you can achieve from a detailed audit.
Yeah, so just kind of recapping the process that both Sharon kind of covered, the starting where we're benchmarking and understanding how your buildings are performing, reporting that data to the city of Denver or the state as well. And once that's done, you can kind of see where you fit as far as average and understanding how much of opportunity for improvement you have for your particular building. Then the next step is to understand from an energy modeling standpoint to be able to dig a little bit further and make smart decisions about investing in your building and making improvements, so that it's not just hoping that this $1 million investment gets you there. It's a more strategic, detailed analysis projecting what your energy might be. And that analysis enables you to have a more comfort in the dollars that are being put in, help the financial office understand, okay, if there's a return on this dollar amount if we invest this much, and also the incentives available. And then project selection, prioritizing what makes sense now versus later, and then critical areas and results. We'll dive into this a little bit and see how this actually works on a case study that we did. It's a project in New York in downtown area. So where, of course, there's not a lot of opportunity for solar. There are existing buildings. We performed the same analysis that we covered. The annual cost savings that we were able to achieve out of this analysis was 31% on cost. The annual emissions that we were able to reduce through implementing all the ECMs that we identified and listed and evaluated was a 29% reduction. The annual energy use reduction was 36%. So that refers back to that EUI, the kBTU per square foot. That's an energy use reduction, not to be confused with energy costs. Of course, there's different costs associated with different energy use types. And then this specifically, the construction cost, we want to point out the construction cost for just one of the ECMs, which was a major chiller upgrade. This was on a steam system as an absorption chiller. So we were looking at that as a main ECM that was going to help impact a lot of their cost savings and convert that to electrifying the building. We evaluated that cost to be around $1.7 million. We looked at the utility, and the utility we were able to prove through our analysis that the savings would get them to electrify the building and remove off of the steam. So the offer from the utility was $360,000 towards the capital cost, which was a great impact on what the building owner needed to come up with. So if we reduce that 1.7 minus the 360,000, that's reduces the payback period and puts some money in the pocket. So the big advantage here is taking advantage of the dollars that are available. And what we did was evaluate, in addition to other federal dollars and tax incentives, we help this building owner evaluate what's available so that these costs can be reduced, as well as reduce the overall energy cost of the building. Another example here talks about, so this is similar, this is in Boston, downtown area of Boston, Massachusetts, and there's similar energy ordinance there as well, to where we were able to evaluate this building through the detailed analysis that we did. We evaluated what's going on with the building. This is an older building. We understood the building envelope needed to be improved. Some windows need to be improved. We were able to do this analysis, and through an energy modeling approach, we were able to identify an annual cost savings of 31%. And this one had a heavy energy use reduction savings because this building was circulating steam for heating. There was a lot of steam loss. The building envelope was not very tight, so there was a lot of loss there. So there was a lot of loss from that, though there was a lot of opportunity for improvement in that area. And we were able to identify how that could improve through the energy modeling strategies. Now, additionally, this building was also wanting to align themselves with the energy ordinance to where the long term is getting to that net zero performance. So they wanted to identify electrifying the building. The electrification of this building, again, with a downtown building, it could be a little challenging with heating. So understanding that, the initial challenge thought was that they wouldn't be able to convert to fully electric because it would cost a lot to heat this building with an electric boiler. And it also would cause them to have to upgrade their electric service, and they would have to build a vault. So that vault would cost them around $1 million. So that cost kind of deterred them. It's like, okay, maybe we can't do this. But by doing this an analysis through an energy model, we were able to understand the design loads a little bit better. The difference between looking at it from a design standpoint and an energy modeling standpoint is when you're looking at it from a design standpoint, you size systems so that they could definitely handle fluctuation in peak loads. And so there's a little bit of safety and oversizing of systems. When we look at it from an energy modeling standpoint, we're getting a little bit more detail into the scheduling of these buildings, how they actually operate. So we're able to do an energy model on this building to understand how exactly, if we implemented heat pumps in this case to this building, how the energy would actually be used. So we were able to see that these heat pump systems could actually stay within the thresholds of what that service could provide. And we were able to get that service approved and get this project moving forward, accepted by the utility, that it can move forward with the peak electric load expected for the building to electrify it. So it prevented upgrades of $1 million. But this, again, goes back to that energy analysis piece that adds value to understanding energy use within the building and seeing the opportunities that exist.
Yeah, so just a summary of the entire program. It's a very short and sweet summary, but these are the main points. Submit benchmark by June 1st, 2022, which is shortly upon us. 30% reduction of EUI by 2030, and don't forget the interim goals in 2024 and 2027 that have to be maintained until those next stages. Yeah. So with that, if there's any questions, we gladly address them now.
Either people are furiously typing, or we just did an awesome job. No. We'll give it a minute or two.
Yeah, we'll give it a couple of minutes. If you do have any questions, you can also email us, reach out to either myself, Marcus, or Sharon, and we gladly address any questions or concerns that you have.
I wanted to make sure that you all know we do have a help center staff. We call it the Energize Denver Hub, where they can give you general support and questions. So if you have any questions about your benchmarking data or what your site EUI targets are because you didn't get your compliance letter or things like that, you can call them, you can email them. We probably have about 100 calls and emails going through the hub every day at this moment because we're getting close to the deadline. So if you have any questions about getting that benchmarking data in or how to do a data correction or what you need to change, please call into the hub and they will definitely be able to help you.
That's okay. I think we'll leave it there. Thanks very much again, Sharon, for joining us. I really appreciate it, and thank you for everybody on the call or the presentation. We hope this was helpful to you. And I guess the slides will be made available. The slide deck will be made available. I guess in the next couple of days, we'll send them out to you. So thank you very much again.
Thanks, everyone.